So today's conversation is going to be around the digitization and the standardization of product data. And Phil, I guess I want to speak to Phil about this. And we spoke about the smoke and mirrors of having different distributors not wanting to share product data. And we also spoke about how number of manufacturers haven't got an MDM strategy. They haven't got a data management strategy in place. Thinking back, in terms of your experience, how big is the problem? How many manufacturers have got an MDM strategy? Have you looked into that? How big is the missing problem of companies not having a data strategy put together?
Well, in our view, and as I said, I represent MEP contractors just in the UK. So specifically looking at a procurement transaction where we want to be part of the thread. You know, we see ourselves as a consumer of data, and then we want to push that out to the clients for their maintenance models, etc. And it's a constant challenge. That there is good data available. There are manufacturers that support good data, but many of them find themselves in the position where they're reactive. Recently spoke to a number of them that although they provide data to a central hub that we use, they're also providing data in silos. And I think this is part of the problem, is that everyone's not quite sure who their paymaster is. They're trying to be a one size fits all. So if they get demand, they fulfill it. And to me, that's part of the problem. Just fulfilling demand as it comes in through the door is not helping the problem. Arguably, it's actually the problem itself, rather than everybody just focusing on, you know, that single version of the truth. Okay.
But from a trade association, for example, there's a number of these kind of databases. You've got Lookins Live, you've got ETIM. What's the advantage of them wanting to work together? As in, they've got a business model that they're trying to work with. If they were to merge together, or if they followed the same standard, would there be a requirement for two of these databases?
Well, I think there's two parts to that. One is a single version of the truth or a unique identifier. I personally don't believe you can have more than one unique identifier that is primary. You could have secondary data sets, of course, but there has to be one primary key. And then the other part is the ETIM and other classification systems, and they are just that. They're a taxonomy, and you can have as many of them as you want. Really, it depends on what platform you use and how you want to use it. I think the language is confusing for some manufacturers. They're seeing classification systems as providing data. It's not providing data. It's just grouping and classifying it. They need to provide the data in a form that it can be used agnostically across the industry. You've already mentioned EAN. In the data sets we have, about 70% of MEP data has got an EAN code available. We know that the Lookins data is fairly well populated, although some of it, you know, needs a lot of work. And I recently spoke to BSI. They were at the cusp of introducing a unique identifier as well. So again, to me, that's adding more confusion. You know, I've used this analogy many times, but if you look at what goes in the wider world, there's, you know, look at registration plates or VIN numbers for vehicles. They're allocated by this single version of the truth. We don't go anywhere else for them, and we know that we trust them, but there are multiple sources of construction data.
I think kind of backing up what Phil was talking about there, from a military perspective, everything that comes through our supply system, whether it's construction tools to Royal Engineers or any of the things that come through the supplies, it's got something called a NATO stock number. It's a unique identifier that no matter who manufactures it, comes through with a single number. So we can track whatever comes right from manufacturer all the way to when it was deployed out on operations or wherever it might be around the world. So the concept of putting a number against something, or a unique identifier against something, as Phil's saying, it's not new, but we've just got to stop reinventing and creating more and more numbers each time and diluting what we're doing. I think one of the interesting things you might want to look at is the oil and gas industry. So they've had something called an asset tagging strategy in place for decades, where an asset itself has a number, okay, which identifies its function and duty, and lots of other information. But what it does is it has a product, service, material, piece of equipment, or whatever it is, associated with that number. And you have a database which literally has that set of asset numbers, and then you have whatever is fulfilling it. Because I think that was one of the things that I think frustrates me with the concentration on product information, is that, okay, sorry to some of the product people out there, but it's very much for transient thing. I might buy a product, it'll be in use for 2 or 3 years maybe, and I'll throw it away because it either stops working or I replace it or it becomes obsolete. And to have something that keeps that purpose all the way through, that number that tells me what I'm doing for the whole life cycle of that asset, no matter what product takes its functional duty, I think is more important in here than just purely something that is almost like a throwaway piece of equipment. Just might not be a popular view, but I think it's I think it's something that we need to concentrate on from the other angle.
As a product owner, what's your perspective on this?
I think that we can have as many identifiers, as many unique identifiers as we want. But at the end, it's about properties. Those properties are defined in standards. And those standards are closed book that cannot be even shared on the internet. That's what you read on the first page of every standard. Don't share it on internet. Which, to standardize something, it's kind of annoying that you want to agree on a common dictionary and you cannot share or show the dictionary to anyone.
Maybe just comment on that. Yeah, I agree. But also, if a company, there is a way. Again, it's looking at benefit. If company is spending 4 or 5 million on a box PIM system and can't afford to pay 25 euros for a standard, then there is a problem. I think that's a fundamental issue. There is also needs to be taken into consideration that I agree with Joseph, because how is it that I can buy the new Iain ISO 23386 for 25 euros in English version from Estonia and from certain other standardization organization, which I don't want to name, 495 euros. So how is that possible? I agree that's an issue, but there should be a minimum, like 25 euros is because they just basically, the Estonian standardization organization is just presenting the minimum cost, which I understand. That's because the SEN, we as experts at the SEN level, we're not being paid. It's just companies are investing. So there needs to be some recovery for printing and translating, but it needs to be accessible, I agree. And they should not be these standards, but there should be something going on around this pricing. Why one standardization organization charging 200 euros, another one charging 25 euros. On top of that, you get passes. On top of that, you get different green guide ratings. On top of that, you get identifiers. And obviously, if you are a manufacturer, you end up paying just for badges, basically, isn't it? And that's wrong. So yeah, I agree with Joseph.
In Czech Republic is that we identify 4,000 standards that are quoted in our laws. And we made another law saying that these 4,000 standards have to be freely available, because they are simply like a street sign, which you have to see in order to drive the correct velocity, the speed.
Yeah.
And we don't pay for extra sign on the street, £10.
Do you think it's a problem here that client organisations will just go, oh, and you've got to deliver to standard X, Y, and Z, rather than actually defining what information I require as a client, what information I actually value, because there might be a huge portion of that standard that I don't value at all as a client. It's just something that's put on me as a as a millstone around my neck. But there will be a large portion that is valuable to me, because I can use that to not only make my operational and business decisions, but I can also pass that down to the consumers, whether that is a person living in the building or driving along the motorway or whatever it might be. But I think that's one of the things I see in the BIM world, the digital twin worlds, is that clients will just go, oh, you've got to do it to BS, whatever it is, or ISO, whatever it is, without actually looking at the standard, working out what is valuable and what they like to pay for.
That's a really good point, Ian, actually. And I think half the problem is there's too many standard references and not enough description of what you actually want. And that's probably, that's probably not applicable across the board. And I completely get what Josef's saying. And Paul had a really good challenge as well. And I wonder whether some of the standards thing, it almost should be scalable, shouldn't it? In terms of how much, if you're a micro SME and you need a number of standards, shouldn't that be proportionally less than like me from Kier as a tier 1 to go and get the same standards? There's a balance, isn't there, that needs happening. And I suppose we were quite lucky that in the UK the government sponsored all the 1192 stuff, so it was free to us. And now we're feeling the pain of suddenly ISO standards coming out. Oh God, we've got to pay for them. Not an easy answer, but it's a really good challenge actually.
Well, I can only talk about GS1, but GS1's the identifiers and the ski and the standards themselves and the lists are all free, so they're public domain. Each GS1 organisation, there are 115 GS1 organisations. They are locally driven and locally paid for. So yes, the prices do change, but they're not punitive. I mean, if you're an SME in the UK, you can pay 50 quid and you get all your numbers. If you're the largest, Tesco's, and it's in public domain, they pay £3,500 a year to be able to use their standards for their own products. This is not massive costs. The cost to the industry comes in the change. The cost of change is humongous. I mean, if you've got numerous standards and everyone's doing their own thing, and you've got database owners and catalog owners doing their own thing and coming up with the things, this is what we had in the UK in retail. And unfortunately, it's up to the users or legislation to say, this is nuts, guys. Look, do not, for Christ's sake, argue about, come up with the standards, work together, whether it's a GS1 standard or whatever, but come up with one. Single source of the truth, it's a complicated, I think it's a utopia. I after, God damn, 20 odd years in standardization and manufacturing and stuff, I used to work for defense companies. It's unlikely, but if you're all speaking the same language, which is and the identifiers, I think there has to be one, and then you agree a data set, and each manufacturer will do their own, within their own country, within their own requirements, do their own thing, but it's contained, because otherwise it's just anything. And, we see variants, and certainly in the retail environment, retailers are always trying to introduce, we're different and variant, and GS1 tries to dissuade them. The winners of this are the small companies, because trying to trade and work with lots of different suppliers that all have their own standards, all their own identifiers, the cost, the cock-up, and you think about the hospital application. So, if you have an implant or you have a medical device inside you want to know the serialization of that, and you want to be able to identify which patient has got it for the life of that patient. For medical instruments, they're reused time and time again, and they also are uniquely identified. And the unique identification is the keys on the item. The actual data that tells you what's on that key is in a database, and that database is a standard, but each hospital has its own, but they're all linked or getting that way. So, don't try and boil the ocean. I totally agree with you, Lars. Identifiers and the product data are completely different things, and it's the product data that is the real hard work. But you just need to agree on identification and one, because once you have that as the key to the door, that would be my advice. And I know it's jolly complicated to do.
I suppose one of the analogies here with the consumer world is in the past, it was the product manufacturer who told everybody what they were going to write on it, so the product data. So they wrote, as it were, the product data template to say how wonderful this thing was. It was the information they wanted you to know about how great their stuff was, so you buy more of it. And I suppose as you became more concerned about things like allergies and the like, there was an independent body that said you must put this information onto your product data as such. And that's one of the things that it worries me at the moment, is that in the construction industry, the product data templates and the product data sheets are being specified and written by the manufacturers rather than being specified by an independent body or the end users as such. You might argue that, you know, the Building Smart guys and UK BIM Alliance guys are creating these, but then you look at the boards that, or the groups of people that are in there, they're product manufacturers. And you ask them, so who's funding the work? Well, it's the product manufacturers. And that doesn't sit easy with me. And I think in the consumer world, we would have had, and I'm presuming, Gary, that you had the same sort of things in here, is the fact that you couldn't have that. It had to be an independent, not funded.
Well, I mean, look, we're not the tail that wagged the dog. So, and I say we, because that's, you know, having worked 20 years in GS1, I still say we. But it was, you know, it's always the demand side that rule the roost. And GS1 sat in the middle. We facilitate. We're experts in our field, and we facilitate. And we did. And most of my erstwhile team were facilitators. No, you know, they're not. We have some real pointy heads. The guys, but most of it was about getting industry round the table, who are highly competitive. But, you know, when we put product DNA around, it was 4 or 5 major retailers, and then a large number of the manufacturers. We then introduced some of the software providers that provide the software in between. But it is the retailers there. Now, also what was driving this was a lot of legislation coming. You know, 1169 was just the start of it. There is a rafts of legislation about controlling, labeling, how you describe it, how long you keep data, allergens, green agenda, you know. And so, you know, whether the retailers want to sit there and do it, they have to comply. And we have to ensure that the industry knows how to change the standards and make sure that. And so, but it's, you know, in the retail sense, it was driven by retailers, not manufacturers. And if you had all manufacturers around the table, didn't work. In health, there is no central, I hate you know this, there is no NHS as such. There is a central body, but, you know, it's almost, so we had to get the major trusts, the big guys, the leading trusts, and get them all cooking. And then it was more this sort of network effect of getting trust to say, what are you doing here and what are you doing there? Because although GS1 standards are mandated in England and Northern Ireland and Wales, but not Scotland, the level of mandation is up to each trust. If someone dies and it's proved that it was an identification problem or a data problem, then the shit will hit the fan, excuse me. So, but it is not forced. So we're used to dealing with different markets now. From what I can glean from construction, it's a complicated value chain. So, you know, I don't want to oversimplify it. And getting the major, whoever the major players are, unless they decide we've got to change this, then it's going to be really difficult to get the thing moving.
So interesting comments coming in on the chat. Lars, you've mentioning that the discussion needs to be in 2 parts, really: product identifiers and product data. Could you maybe elaborate on that a bit further?
That you, Lars, wasn't it?
Yeah. So I've been working with Building Smart for 10 years, and the last 4 years I'm working with GS1 on a digital supply chain. So all of these topics that we are talking about, it's my daily work, let's say. So first of all, I think it's important to understand, there's one guy here understanding GS1. I think we need to understand when we talk about product identifiers, what are we talking about? Because there are several of them. And it's sad that the construction industry doesn't know GS1 better, because I think that they could have a substantial impact on the construction industry as a whole. And there is very often, let's say, discussions on different identifiers and why do we have to why do we have to pay? I agree strongly with GIRI that the cost of using GS1 is very low, extremely low. So I'm an advocate of GS1. I think it's massively important that we introduce them. In the Nordics, where I'm working, all merchants, all manufacturers, everyone uses GS1. It's not a discussion. And even now the government is mandating on the digital twin that you have to have a GS1 identifier. They're starting with the GTIN. You have to have it. And this is what we need from you. So that's a starting point. But then the conversation on product data, that's a second topic. And that conversation is much more complex, because we have building regulations. We have EU regulations, which is low volt directive, machinery directive, REACH on chemicals, construction product regulation. And we have already in place a technical language under these regulations. So whatever BIM is doing, you can't supersede and go over existing law. And this is why I'm also trying to advocate the work that has been done in SEN and ISO to develop the standard on how to develop properties. I mentioned it in the chat. And for any contractor, manufacturer, client, anyone, to have a common dictionary where we say color. What is color? Is it RAL code or NCS? So then you could say this is RAL for metal, outside, whatever, but there is a common language, and there is a dictionary that allows a machine to pick up a machine code to say this is color. So computers can understand what is what. And I think in this discussion we have today, there is a lot of existing knowledge. This knowledge is there. So it's a matter of how to get this knowledge into people. So in Europe, we have a standardization organization. It's called SEN. They have a digital group, which is SEN 442. This group has developed standards addressing our topics. So in these conversations, I hear that people are talking about left and right, but I think that we should look at what's done in SEN 442, which has an alignment with ISO because of the Vienna agreements, so that these standards is not only European, but global. So the discussion is not only a UK or a Nordic or a German or a French, it's a European discussion, and it's a global discussion. So that's where I'm saying that the identifier question is very important, but please don't mix it with the product data discussion. And the product data discussion is how can one manufacturer, one contractor, and one client agree upon what is a product. This is what the data template standard is applying. It actually is telling you that no matter what uniclass, co-class, there are so many classifications, you can just dream about it. This standard is just saying that this is a window, this is a pipe, this is a clay masonry unit, and it defines what is what. And then it holds all the information that is linked to this construction object, which is a product in this case, so that we can take away all these data silos and that we can work together as a community. So I think my point is here is just trying to say that there is existing knowledge, there is existing solutions, but we need to be more educated on the discussion, because I think that everyone comes from their position in this discussion. So yeah, that's my input.
Let me just quote Knut here, Knut Josang, where he mentioned to me that there is an initiative in Norway to have unique identifier that stops on the type of product, which then allows to have in tender 2 different providers. Knut, you need to correct me. It was about the Chinese imports using the same unique identifier as the Norwegian products.
Yeah, so it's basically for the wholesalers. They would like to have some, instead of applying the GS1 standards with GTIN, of course, to push the manufacturers on price, and also to deliver what's available at the store at the moment. So they would like to couple a lot of manufacturer-specific identifiers to one kind of identifier to provide to the end client. So, but it's not in the past yet, but I would say in a year or 2 it will disappear for good.
And going back to the product data, if you think about, you have one global identifier for a brick or a pipe, then you have 2 manufacturers. The product properties are completely different, but they are still have the unique identifier same. That's terrible. If you think about it, there are 2 completely different products, different characteristics, yet they share the same unique identifier.
I mean, this is an issue, isn't it? The whole issue is that we have all these digital threads, golden thread, the digital unique identifiers, digital object identifiers, BIM objects. Now we have this construction product association product guidelines or marketing product guidelines. Then we have lexicon. So we have 300 eTIM, we have classifications, then we have PIM systems, Informatica, Stibo. They'll just tell you, give me data model, we'll dump it in, whatever happens. And then manufacturers between themselves can't even agree on a definition of a product on that simple thing. So this is an issue that, especially because we're talking about maybe now UK is, I would say, is great on this fake stuff. Just let's call it a buzzword. I even had a manufacturer last month asking me for golden thread compliance. I mean, this is where we are, aren't we? We had this BIM level 2 mandate. Everyone jumped onto BIM objects. That's gone. What happened to that? Then we had a UK BIM Alliance talking about, yeah, let's put objectives by 2019. We have a 75% of the industry there. Where is that metrics gone? What happened to that? So we realized we're not going to achieve that. So quickly we changed to a framework. So now we have a framework. And it's not a critique. I'm only saying it might be worthwhile sometimes saying these are our KPIs. And government maybe take a lead. I don't know who should take a lead and measure the KPIs. We failed. Okay, we failed. Why have we failed? What happened? You know, that's, I think, is the fundamental problem. Now we're concentrating on digital twins, you know, without even, maybe Joseph just said it, how we agree. I agree on the fundamental, what is a product, how you define it, who owns the data. I think this is the problem of kind of this is the hunt of who's doing the biggest press releases and the biggest using the biggest buzzwords, and you know, taking badges, and you struggle to get into different work groups. If you don't wear 20 hats on you, you must have 20 hats, then you are considered, you know. This is kind of the whole thing. Now we have CPA now saying about this code of conduct. If you don't have it, you might not be specified, blah, blah, blah. Well, it really reminds me like the April 2016 mandate, and the manufacturers are fed up. I mean, we're seeing that in Construction Products Europe, the associations are fed up. They just saying, look, give us one guidance, give us plan, we'll stick to it and we'll invest into it. But you have SMEs, they kissed the wrong frogs in the past, like BIM objects, like others, and they don't have the money simply to spend again. So they'll sit back and do nothing.
Do you think that's because people are still not finding the value proposition here, and actually finding out what questions the end user wants to ask, what decisions they need to make, what tasks they need to carry out. Why have I got this information in the first place? And it's not because I want to sell you a product, it's because the person at the end needs to either do something with the product, make a decision with the product, or to have some sort of question answered by that information. And because we've not found the value, or actually put some sort of numerical value against it, the investment isn't there, and people will just keep jumping on the next thing that is going to happen. I'm tired of the number of groups that I've sat in on trying to define various things in digital twins, BIM, and all the like. And they just try and redefine it each time without looking back at the very beginning and saying, why are you doing it? What is the value in what you're doing? And until you answer that question, just people aren't going to do it.
Jump in here. I'm so like, I represent manufacturers, and I wish we were as in control of things as I'm hearing. The truth is, I mean, I'm not an expert on BIM or data or anything, but as far as I can see, data is about communication. It's about one end to another, exchanging information. And there's too much initiative, too many initiatives I've seen which were one end or the other trying to decide what should be done. I just don't think any of this should happen unless both ends of the communication get together and discuss what exactly. And the monetization, I mean, the one thing that I'm realizing is data forces companies to understand what people do with their data. People understand what people do with their products, but I don't think they understand what happens with the data yet. And that's really important. And that's, I think when that starts happening, you'll get some progress, I think, but it's a slow progress at the moment. I wish I knew what we were meant to be doing.
I think just, I'm sorry, I see Phil's put his hand up, but I'm just going to jump back in this. It was one of the things we did for the infrastructure asset data dictionary of the UK was to actually start with the questions. So go back to the very beginning and say, what questions do you need to ask? What tasks do you need to carry out? And how do you want, what information do you need to actually answer that question? And how do you want that information presented to you to make it? And just getting those three things from the actual end user, we started to build up a really, I think, a valuable set of information against infrastructure assets, purely because it was the stuff people needed, not what other people thought they wanted.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll jump out.
The world of standards for product data templates and so on, there's groups of properties. And to me, they're important because that should capture a dialogue between two parties who want to know about that product. And it's a set of data that's relevant to that conversation. And you just, the template just builds up on those.
Can I just add a comment? Maybe I'm throwing glasses in throwing stones here, but coBuilder, we have developed a solution for, we have a dictionary and we have a solution for distributing data templates. We are now with the Danish industry actors working on a common dictionary. We're doing it in Norway, in Sweden, and in several other countries in Europe. This is our work. This is what we do. This is my profession. I have a dictionary. I have 20 people reading European documents. So it's a lot of people. So the way that I see it is that it's so massively important that what the UK does is not a UK thing, because it should be a global thing, or it should at least be a European thing. So, and just an example, in Norway in 2001, the 10 largest contractors came together in a room and agreed what to do. Just because of this meeting, they have achieved, do we have GTINs? Tick off. All merchants have the GTINs. There is no one, even the ones which Josef, you mentioned, they are now moving away from it. Everyone is using GTIN. Why? Because all the contractors were saying, this is how we're going to do it. And then by driving it from the market actors, I think in the UK, it's so, I'm just tired of attending a lot of meetings where people address new topics and new words. So to implement something, that is where I think that the contractors is key, and they have to be educated, and they should sit together and say, what do we want? And this will guide the manufacturers. I'm working with a lot of the larger manufacturers in Europe, and they want these words to be said. It needs to come from someone. So either it's the government that sets something top down, it's COBI, sorry to say, but COBI does not work. It does not implement anything other than a schema, a database, and that's it. But the contractors, they know I want cost calculations, I want sustainability, I want to break my silos so that I can describe a wall type to be reused and reused, or a product to be reused that breaks my project silos, where I can communicate across. So I think it's very important for the UK actors, actually, for the contractors to come together and say, this is what we should do. So
Lars,
yeah,
we've got a couple of contractors on here, so should we speak to them about how they've tried to get together? So Phil, is it Antti as well from Kier? So Phil, have you tried to get together, and what's your view on this?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I have tried. Well, I have. What I've done is I've set up a small working group with other MEP contractors, and we're meeting fortnightly, and we're discussing the data usage, etc. And really good content coming out of this discussion. And just picking on what Lars said there about the need for contractors to align and this unique identifier being the first thing. It's exactly what I've been saying. But there's a huge level of ignorance in not just kind of manufacturing, distribution, but on the contracts as well. The consumers of the data don't really know what they want. And when I've asked the people that have joined the working group about the quality of the data we use, because it is focused on the data set we currently use, which is from Lookings, which is a well-established data set in the UK. The answer to the question is quite often, oh yeah, the data's fine, it works, it's good. We've been using it for years. So then when I drill down into it and ask them, well, can I see evidence of what that data looks like? Can you show me how you consume the data and how you transact it? It's generally quite poor, because people are placing orders on a specials basis, or on the basis of just against a quotation. And I think again, there's the two parts to this. One, it's great having good data and being able to use it, but secondly, the consumers of the data need to demonstrate that they're using the data, so that then gives the feedback to the manufacturers that their efforts are worthwhile. And one thing we've done, it's great that we've always got this link back to GS1, because it is, seen as that global solution. And I do think that having a global solution to this industry problem is what's needed, because even if you make a UK solution, it's potential silo. And what we've done is we've been working with manufacturers. Could I just pop a screen share on? It might be useful if I just share my screen, because the content of this might be useful. Let me just share the screen. Okay, so if you can see the screen there, this is a manufacturer that we've been working with. Now, I don't want to present this as being the nirvana to the solution. What I'm doing is saying what we're trying to do in a pragmatic sense to actually adopt a single version of the truth at the moment is, this is a manufacturer that provides our cable lugs at the moment. This is who we align with, and they provide a branded product that we purchase on our jobs. If we go down to their data set here, they've got their own product identifier. They've also got the EN number, which is the GS1 code, the GTIN, and they've also got the TSI code, which is the Trimble Lookings code. So what we're doing with them is we're trying to almost position it ourselves so that we can use agnostic data, and then we can use it in a transaction. So we've got this data here now. This manufacturer, to my knowledge, it's one of the first in the UK that's providing this version of the truth to facilitate transactional data. And if we take this code and I punch it into Lookings, you get the item there. There's the item with the barcode again. So you've got the classification system. This is different than the manufacturer does, but it flows through. You've got that adoption of the thread. You've got that single version of the truth. If I go to our own platform and I've searched for that item, this is our internal e-catalog. There's the item again, and we can place the demand for this, and that will go through to the supply chain. So this really, what I'm again trying to demonstrate here is this an example of just using data without obviously understanding where this direction, the travel is going to go with this whole industry issue, we're trying to generate that conversation at a strategic level, but also provide a pragmatic solution to the day-to-day issues that we face. And this is, I think, what's hopefully tried to demonstrate to the industry of what actually works. And the more contractors that actually make something work and test this, the more that we're going to get out of this conversation.
So what you're saying, Phil, is that there is a simple solution to this, or a simpler solution now, if we just follow some set of standards.
I think so, yeah. I mean, I can't, Paul's analogy of the kissing the frog was perfect, but I can't, this is a complex matter, we know that, but we've over a number of years, we've made it more complex than it needs to be. The first thing we need to agree is having a unique identifier. Somebody at a high level needs to say, like Lars alluded to, you know, in Scandinavian countries, they just said, this is the code we'll use, end of story, okay? And from that then, you can grow the data sets and the taxonomies and the classification systems, and they can be different for different people depending on their demand needs, but surely one code. I mean, please God, one code.
I think an interesting comment that example that Gary gave last week was the way that GS1 had dealt with NHS numbers. You inserted a global identifier on top of that NHS number. Is that right, Gary?
Yeah, the GTIN was embedded in the NHS number, which is all important if you're getting your COVID vaccine. I found is embedded in the it's not a GTIN, it's can't remember what key they're using, but you know, look, if we said to the NHS, you know, we sat down with them and said, okay, this is how the standards work. Well, we've got this NHS number, and it's everyone's got one, and we don't want to send out to 68 million people who've got to change your NHS. Can you imagine? So you know, that's where you sit down with the industry and you find a way of getting through that. And it's taken, you know, we've been doing health on 10 years. It's really moved momentum now. But, you know, it's not an easy task, because the NHS, similar to construction, is completely decentralized. Everyone's done their own thing. There's no central push. So it's been very, very difficult, even more difficult than retail, where you've got a few players that rule the roost. But even getting those guys to align is a challenge. I won't hide from you, you know, but there's got to be the determination that we don't compete on the data standard. How you use the data, how you monetize the data, that's fine, but can we have a way of identifying products and that we all agree? And if we've got multiple data pools, which is what happens, then as long as you're all using the same keys, then it's going to be easier to synchronize those services. And you know, the industry got behind Brand Bank, which provides a lot of the digital data for retailers, and GS1, which provides a lot of the supply chain data, and effectively said to Brand Bank, look guys, you need to use GS1 standards. We want you to work with GS1. Now they're a commercial enterprise, and we found a way. You know, we're owned by our members, all 45,000 of them, majority of them SMEs. If they say, you've got to do this, we want you to do this, and put pressure on both sides of the demand cycle, then it will happen. But you haven't got that pressure, which comes back to your point, Iain, about, you know, what problem are we trying to solve? What is the compelling business case that is going to say, crikey, we've got to do it? Is it you know, is it Grenfell? Is it something? Usually there's something. It's either societal, you know, consumers want this, they want green, they want this, they want to know where the food comes. We're working with IBM on track and trace of food because, you know, we need to know where this food's come from. So it has to come from industry. The associations are there to facilitate, but it has to come from the big players saying, stop this, let's sunset all of these things. Those that have a commercial interest in standardization is a challenge. Those that run their own data pools, there's going to have to be a migration over time, and you set a sunset date. But if you don't get on the road to doing this, it'll never happen. And by the way, when I first went into sort of standardization and before I went back into industry, which was about 30 odd years ago, construction was one of the user groups we had, and we really decided that the major players just couldn't get their act together to work together, and that's probably because there wasn't a compelling business case to do so.
Brian's got his hand raised. I'm going to let him make the last ask the last question or the last comment, and then I'm going to have to round up this. Would you like to unmute, Brian?
It's on the top.
Unmute.
Right.
Okay, it's appeared itself. Okay, I'm on. Yeah, so there's loads of things that I'd like to comment on, but probably haven't got the time. Grenfell, yes, Grenfell is going to drive change, or the industry is going to change because of Grenfell. I don't know whether the industry is capable of changing, but it's going to try. Trustmark is coming out of the retrofit program because Green Deal failed so miserably and Eco failed so miserably. One thing that I think I'm not so interested in the metadata so much as the information that you're talking about, the data about products. Sandy, some time ago, developed a thing called SpecNet, and Barber also developed Barber Expert, which were both expert system driven tools for searching through millions of products to find the 3 that met all of the requirements. My ambition is to try and get people to get into the habit of choosing products because they have the right properties for the right applications so that they're competent building components. If we don't ever get into that habit, we're just going to keep on buying the next cheapest product and substituting the one, and we'll end up with buildings that are fundamentally incompetent. And especially in the context of carbon reduction, we've got to get it right, and we've got to stop substituting going on. So an expert system front end to search for the right product, to do the right thing in the right place, in the right position, in the elements. Those sorts of questions need to be front end search engine that help us to get somewhere, instead of just focusing on, oh, it's cheaper than the other one, or it's smaller than the other one. In the M&E world, looking at the widget that you just showed us, the cable terminator, it only has one function, well, maybe 1 or 2 other properties, but it's only got one function. We have products in the market that are being used in the wrong places. We're having, you know, even the major thermal insulation manufacturer, Kingspan, making one product and then rebadging it as 4 different applications, and then disseminating information which was fundamentally flawed and in most cases completely erroneous, and trying to get away with selling more of their stuff despite everything. So, you know, we've got to get out of these kind of bad habits and get back to building competent buildings. So, you know, we need better tools to search through the data sets that you're going to assemble so that we've got better buildings potentially. Loads of other things to comment on, but I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thank you, Brian. So just to sum up, thank you for everybody that made the time to attend. I guess there's from Lars, we learned about the fact that we shouldn't just be thinking this from a UK perspective, but we should be looking at this at a global level, or at least a European level. Gary echoed this, and I guess what we need to speak to Gary about is who at GS1 should we be speaking to? Who could he invite potentially for the next roundtable? Who's possibly worked on this stuff before, understands the issues? We learned that with Phil Thompson that the contractors have been chairing a roundtable, and potentially this is something that we could tap into further with the help of GS1. On the whole, there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot to digest. Is there anything else that you want to finish up on, Phil?
No, I'm all done. Thank you very much for the invite.
Thank you. So thank you, everyone. And,
Thanks a lot for organizing it.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So cheers.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Nice to meet you all.